All right. I want to talk about Buddhism and Christianity. Um, I've been a Christian I've grown up in uh, in Christianity, and I still consider myself to be a follower of Yeshua. Um, but I've also, due to uh, feeling like I'm missing something in life, I guess you'd say I've somewhat frantically been looking around and searching for what I might be missing. And in the course of that searching, I've had a lot of my own experiences, but I've also done, some listening and reading with other philosophies and religions, and uh, I think I think after a good bit of listening, I think I have a better idea of where others are coming from. And anyway, so I want to talk about Buddhism and a little bit, and what I think they're saying, and how it compares to Christianity. I'm not going to go into a lot of technical language or anything like that, but from a language perspective, I would like most of what I'm going to be focusing around, I'd like to define it as a single word, which is shoulding. So I like verbing nouns sometimes, and so I'm kind of verbing a noun by saying shoulding, stop shoulding, basically is the advice. It's kind of the distillation of what I think a lot of the Buddhist philosophy is, but it's also I think a lot of what Jesus was saying. So shoulding is basically saying that things should be different than they are. Willing reality to be different than it is. So you could should yourself, for example. You could say, well, I should be better at this or that, or I should do this less. I should drink less. I should give more, etc. And I don't think it's bad to use our abilities as humans to see how things could be different. Because sometimes it is, things are, the way I like to word it is, all is as it should be, but not necessarily as it ought to stay, or as it should stay. And if I have the power to change something and that I think should be changed, well, maybe that's a good thing to do. But when I'm talking about shoulding, I'm really wanting to focus on agonizing over reality. Basically, what happens is, us humans, we build a model of how reality should be. And we compare that model of reality with reality itself. And when they don't match up, we get upset. And I think a lot of what Buddhism is trying to say is trying to get us to stop doing that. So Buddhism is often, the first of the noble truths that it's taught is that suffering. And the idea that suffering comes from desires. And that's not, and so, if you have a Buddhist student and they say, okay, well, I don't want to suffer, so I want to get rid of all of my desires. And then, of course, this hypothetical student would have a desire to get rid of their desires, which is itself a desire. And so, I think the Buddhist philosophy, folks would say, well, you can't, don't do it like that. Don't should yourself into being free of desire. And just to kind of translate here, I think when they say desire, I think in some ways what they're saying is shoulding. So shoulding, you could say, is what causes a lot of the suffering in the world. So saying that reality is different than it should be. But so anyway, you don't want to. So I'm saying stop shoulding, which is kind of a way of saying you should less. But you're still going to have some desires and some desire for things to be different than they are. You're still going to see things and say, oh, this should be different. And that's okay. So it's kind of like caveated, you should less, but be aware of the things that you can't help shoulding, I guess. But let's think about this. Like, why like shoulding? So really this talk could also be called should less, or stop shoulding. And a couple things to think about with this. Let's go back to a Christian perspective, or really any kind of theistic worldview. The idea is that there is a God, and that God is in control of the world. I like to use the terminology of, the Father is the artist, and Christ is the art. So I believe that everything in this life is an expression of God, is the Word of God expressed. In other words, this world, I believe in the idea of the universal Christ, as in, I do believe that the Christ incarnated in Jesus 2,000 some years ago, but obviously I believe that Christ has been around, the member of the Trinity has been around forever. So if Christ is the firstborn of all creation, he's of creation, I believe. And of course, a lot of people are going to say, "Oh, you're saying that he's not really God then, because if he's of the creation, then there must have been some time before he was created." Now, I don't think that's true, because if God doesn't change and the Father apparently creates, like does art, then he's always been creating. And so I see the Father as the eternal artist and Christ as the eternal art that is proceeding from the Father. So you've got, just like the Word proceeds from the Father, I'm using the word art to describe Christ in the same way as I would use the term word. Or, I think if you translate the Bible to Chinese and you translate it back, in the beginning was the Tao, and the Tao was with God, and the Tao was God. The Tao is another name for word, and art is another name that I'm using for word, or for Christ. Okay, so if this is actually all God's art, then for one thing, just a little side note on different religions and stuff. People say, like, to quote the verse, Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." And when I hear that, my thought is, well, obviously, no one can come to the Father except through Christ. He's the life. Yeah, like in John, I think it's John 14, when he says, "I am the way, the truth, and what? And the life." He's the life that we're all living. It's all, instead of God writing just a letter or putting on a play, he created this fully immersive three-dimensional experience we called life, and that is Christ. At least that's, and Christ may extend beyond that. I don't know, obviously, all the limits, and I'm not going to try to define anything like that. But I do believe that this life we are living is Christ, and it is, and this is the important part here, it's God's art. This is all God's art. And God is, in my model of viewing things, God is an artist of unlimited abilities and power. And so it's like, he's not having to have shortcuts or anything like that. He, I believe that God made the world exactly as he wanted it. But when I say that things are different than they should be, I'm actually saying I know better than God. And think about that for a minute. Think twice before, I guess, being a critic of God's art, and of implying that you actually, could do better. Maybe think twice before that, before doing that. So there's kind of this. I'm kind of trying to, and I'm not always in this mindset, but I try to stay in this position of, really, I think it's a position of humility in saying, this is all God's art. I have ideas of how I would like it to be different, but all is as it should be, though maybe not as it should stay. God created the world and said it was good. Now, some people say man came along and created, sinned, and there's the fall of the world, and they like to say that this is all a mess now, and it's all a dirty place, and that's a lot to say. It's a lot to say that this place, which is essentially God's art, is actually a big dump. That's quite a critical statement. So what about when there's bad stuff? One of my sons has autism, and he suffers a good bit from that. And it seems to me like things should be different. But I trust that things are as God desires them to be. Maybe it's that, there's some lessons to be learned for myself, for my wife, for our family, or other people. Maybe Haston is taking on a Christ-like position on the cross, suffering so that some may learn. Maybe, who knows, maybe we're supposed to discover some cure for autism. I don't know. But I see something in life that I don't like, such as my son having autism. And, I could look at it and I could say, God's in control, but chaos has a lot of reins. Chaos has a lot of control. And, God doesn't control every little aspect. Sometimes bad stuff just happens, but I don't believe that kind of stuff anymore. I believe that God is sovereign. God is fully in control. I don't know if I wouldn't say I'm a Calvinist, even though some of that is some kind of Calvinist language. See, I believe that God's in control, but I actually believe that we are one with God, and so He delegates some of that control to us. And anyway, that's kind of a big tangent, but I ultimately believe God is one, and we are members of God. John 10:34 says, Jesus says, I have said you are gods, quoting Psalm 82, which has more to say about that. Anyway, shoulding. I see stuff like my son having autism, and I think, I have some pain in my life or something. And I think that I can have a model of how I think things should be different. But it's good not to confuse, not to say that my model is actually the best, because I don't know for sure if it is. And sometimes I think that there are negative stimuluses in life that are there. Like that should be there to teach something. With my son having autism, for example, what good could come out of that? Well, I don't. It makes me think about maybe we should stop poisoning the planet. Maybe we should. Maybe like there's all these chemicals and stuff that that people have been changing in the environment. Glyphosate and antibiotics and all these hosts of chemicals. There's a lot of there's some negative feedback incoming here with the rates of autism increasing, and maybe there's some lessons that we as a collective humanity need to learn real quick, or things could get bad real quick. And so it's like, well, if we're doing something like poisoning ourselves and poisoning our environment, and then some kids like my son get hurt, well, you might say, well, autism shouldn't exist, and it shouldn't be this way. But the negative stimuluses for me have, I think they're negative feedback from, and if you, and so part of, I guess, the idea of what I'm saying is to look for the message in the suffering. Sometimes there may be a message that you can get, and maybe the negative stimuli that you might be experiencing, maybe it's not the ideal state of the world in a hypothetical scenario, but it is exactly maybe what should be happening given the surrounding circumstances. But yeah, when I hear the Buddhist philosophy of desire is the cause of suffering, and okay, well, I'm going to go and stop desiring. Well, I think it's really saying stop shoulding yourself and stop shoulding other people. I've been married for about a decade and a half now, and my wife and I haven't had any problems at all. Just kidding. But we've had some pretty serious problems, and I've realized I've realized that a lot of the problems have come from me trying to should my wife to be different, and trying to should myself. I've told her on a number of occasions that I've not liked, maybe say, her response to me or to something I've said or done. And I've kind of tried to, tell her that, hey, I don't like how you're acting. And, basically it's always, the lesson for me has been, this, how I'm acting is basically just how I am. I can't help, basically, she's told me, essentially, I am who I am, and I need what I need, and stop trying to should me, and there's been times where I haven't had some of, I think, my needs met, and I've tried to kind of push through it and should myself into, everything's good like this, this, I don't like it, but, and that's not the idea. That's not the idea of, I don't think, of Buddhism or, because essentially, when I do that, when I'm shoulding myself or I'm shoulding someone else, I'm basically invalidating their feelings. So if it's talking to my wife, I'm saying, hey, you shouldn't behave, you shouldn't respond to me like this or whatever. Well, maybe you shouldn't act that way then, is kind of the response. And so I should not be shoulding. I shouldn't be shoulding her. I shouldn't be shoulding myself. Now, I think a caveat to this is, again, we can see how things could be different. And there's some things where I just really, really want them to be different, and I can't help it. And I think this is okay. In the Buddhist philosophy, I think the idea is, if desire is what causes suffering, and I'm desiring not to feel a certain way, that is itself a desire. And maybe instead of kind of identifying myself with this suffering person who's feeling this negative emotion, I can see myself, I can turn my awareness to, okay, I'm suffering with this. I have a negative reaction here. I have a bad emotion I'm feeling. And instead of just believing that chaos rules, I'm saying, no, I think God's in control. And there's a message here. And I should really be looking for that message. Instead of trying to should it away, it shouldn't be this way, close my eyes to it, or I should be better, this thing shouldn't bother me, or this person shouldn't be behaving this way. It's instead kind of a position of humility to say, okay, let's suppose that nothing's actually broken here. Maybe something, maybe I'm just receiving. It's like if a light, warning light goes on in your car. Do you look at that and say, well, that the check engine light shouldn't be on, and then go and try to figure out how to turn off the check engine light? No, you trust that it actually is a legitimate signal, and you try to figure out what is causing it. So that's kind of what not shoulding kind of, I think, means to me. On a larger scale, backing up. Okay, so again, Buddhism says, desires cause suffering. Well, and I'm saying, I think that translates to, should stop shoulding. But another way to word it is how Jesus did, which is, don't worry about your life, what you will eat, what you will drink, what you will wear. Don't worry. This is a divine commandment. If you at least follow Christ, you will believe that to not worry is itself a divine commandment. It's hard not to worry, though, when you have worrying circumstances. But part of the message, though, here is also, so let's say you have some negative emotions, and you say, well, I want to control my mind. I want to get rid of these negative emotions. I think part of the Buddhist philosophy, which again goes along with Christianity, is that actually you're not in control of everything. You may not even, you're not actually fully in control of your own mind, even. And so maybe you're feeling some negative emotions and you're trying to control it. You're trying to force, your mind to change in some way, but you can't do it. You find you can't do it. And this observation of our own lack of control seems to be a very crucial message that seems to be repeated in a number of places. Jesus says you don't need to worry, and the idea is that God's in control. If you don't believe God's actually in control, if you actually think God's kind of like a deism kind of position, that God's out there and he created the world, but like he doesn't really pull on the strings, and actually chaos is doing a lot of that, well, you're not going to be able, I don't think, to relax or to not worry. But if you believe that God is actually in control, if you actually believe that all is as it should be, then I think there's opportunity for peace. This idea that you're not in control, even of your own mind, is also echoed in, for example, the Alcoholics Anonymous 12 steps. The very first step is an admission that you don't have control over your addiction. And I've heard other spiritual teachers reiterate this advice of the importance of accepting your own limited, and we do have some control over our minds and stuff, I think, but you don't have full control, and we have some power in the world, but not full power. We have some free will, but I can't make myself enjoy breathing water through my nose. I just can't. So we have free will within some parameters. And again, I don't think that conflicts with the idea of God being sovereign, because I actually think we are one with God. But I think it's just, and if you hold this view that no, I really should be fully in control of my mind, and if I'm experiencing something that's a negative emotion, I want to control my mind instead of listening to it. Or maybe it's, what some people would call the heart. I want to silence it instead of listening to it. That doesn't seem to work. Trying to coerce or force things doesn't seem to work. And on a larger scale, this actually gets, I think, one of the major problems with a lot of religion, is that religion is generally trying to should people to behave differently, rather than to take note of why a person is behaving in a certain way and to try to address the unmet need, or the knowledge that is lacking. Buddhism, Hinduism, philosophy, there's a lot said about knowledge, and the idea is that suffering comes from a lack of understanding. Basically, I generally believe that all evil is a lack of understanding. Jesus said, when he was dying on the cross, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." Now, they knew they were killing him and all this kind of stuff, but I think ultimately any sin comes from a lack of understanding, a lack of knowledge, because sin is a bad deal. At least I think so. I think most Christians would agree with that too. If sin is a bad deal and you're taking the deal, you have some lacks in your understanding. And all of us, me too. Yeah, there's something that's off in your understanding, something that's missing or something that's incorrect, and that's why you sin. You shouldn't condemn people for something they don't understand. And that, I believe that when Jesus said, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do," I don't believe that was a one weird kind of caveat, most sinners know what they're doing, but these particular Roman soldiers who are killing Jesus, they don't happen to really know what they're doing. They don't know I'm the Son of God. Maybe he's saying, you could see that argument. But I actually believe that when Jesus was saying, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do," I think he was actually revealing the divine secret of forgiveness for all sin, which is you don't blame a kid for not knowing something they haven't yet learned. I've gotten upset with my kids before, or someone else, where they did something let's say one time I remember my son hanging off of my side view mirror on my truck. And I remember annoyedly telling him, hey, stop doing that. And he said, sorry, you didn't tell me. And it really hit me. Oh, yeah. How would he know? How would he know that I didn't want him to hang on this side mirror? I never told him that. So don't blame a kid for their lack of knowledge. And, you might say that, well, anyone who's sinning, they're not guiltless. They know they're doing something wrong. And that, they may know it's wrong, but it's actually not, I don't think that sin is actually in anyone's best interest. I think that ultimately the price you pay is greater than the benefits you gain from it. And, a lot of times with sin, it seems like a good deal until the bill comes due. And the bill may not come due for decades. And maybe then but either way. So I think all sin comes from a lack of knowledge, and I think that, a lot of times people are doing the best they know how. They're living the best strategy according to their own model, their model of life. We're all ultimately living according to our own models of life. Obviously, there's different meta models like Christianity and Buddhism and stuff like that. But every individual still has their own interpretation of what various words mean and how life works and all of that kind of stuff. Anyway, I think that probably gets most of it. Oh, I guess the last thing I was wanting to say. The problem with religion, with a lot of religions, I think, is that they try to should people. William Blake wrote, if the fool would persist in his folly, he would become wise. He also wrote, call that not virginity that wishes but acts not. And the idea is, if the heart is not aligned, it's like 1 Corinthians 13. If you do all these great things, but you have not love, it profits you nothing. Don't say that you're a good person because you'd really, you're not killing these people, but you'd really, really want to. No, that's like Jesus saying, if you committed adultery if you've lusted after a woman. It's about alignment between the heart and the actions. The goal is to be aligned. And I think a lot of what can happen is, with a lot of religious groups, is they confuse the substance with the form. They see the outward form of bad behavior, and they say, we need to should this. You should stop doing that. You should do that less. You should behave differently. You should do more of this. You should not do that as much. Without stopping to ask the questions of why are they choosing that? And I think that what can happen is if you try to keep things as external laws that are forced from the outside, then the law never crystallizes in the heart, and that's the goal. In that day, how's it worded? I will pour out my spirit on all flesh, and I will write my law in their hearts, and their sons and daughters will prophesy. I'm leaving out some verses there, but that's the idea, though, is, God will fill us with His Spirit and write His law on our heart. And the goal is to have the law in your heart. The goal is to be harmonious between your heart and your actions, between your inner world and your outer world. And I think a lot of times, on an individual basis as well as a collective basis, we can do way too much shoulding, which is just, it should be this way. You should behave this way. Without realizing, I think everyone's generally they're living their life, making the choices that they as a collective, they as a person with different parts of them, themselves, inner parent, inner child, blah, blah, blah. They believe that they're taking the best actions. They're not, people aren't going out looking to get themselves a bad deal. They're doing what they believe that is best for them to do. And so just trying to should them into behaving differently, I don't think is a good way to go. Now, you got someone who's really behaving badly. Okay, you may have to lock them up or something. You may have to take some strong actions. You may have to, maybe, if it's your, maybe you have to give, maybe it's good for you to give them some negative reinforcement. This is not a good way to behave, but just simply trying to should people, just simply trying to say, well, you're behaving this way and that's not the way you should be. You should be this other way. I just don't think it actually works. It may sound good. You may think that you could do that, but I mean, I've seen zero evidence that actually is effective for anything. And I think it's actually damaging because like, as long as you're operating from this perspective of, well, it's kind of this slavery, robotic perspective well, what am I supposed to do? Okay, I'm going to do that. What am I not supposed to do? And a lot of Christians, I think, especially in the Protestant area, they have a very slave-like mentality because a lot of folks don't even believe the Spirit still speaks today, and they believe that all we are supposed to do is read the Bible and just do what it says. It's not about listening for the Spirit directly or thinking for ourselves. Again, with the big note that God made our brains. He made us the way we are. I think He intended us to use our minds, and otherwise He would have made robots. Anyway, that's probably enough on that topic. I could go on and on probably for another little while. Stop shoulding except when you can't. And accept yourself as you are. Accept other people as they are, trusting that we are all works of God, works of art made by God. And to honor that, and to trust that God's like actually a good artist.